Genesis chapter 21, beginning at verse 22. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me, or my children, or my descendants. Show to me, and the country where you now reside, as a foreigner, the same kindness I have shown to you. Abraham said, I swear it. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I heard about it only today. So Abraham brought sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a treaty. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock. And Abimelech asked Abraham, What is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs you have set apart by themselves? He replied, Accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. So that place was called Beersheba, because the 2 men swore an oath there. After the treaty had been made at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the eternal God. And Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time.
Genesis 21 is a case of deja vu all over again, isn't it? Because what we have here is a similar story to the case of Abimelech and Abraham back in Genesis chapter 20, which does give rise to the beginning of our chapter, where Abimelech is a little on the, well, you weren't that trustworthy last time, Abraham, so maybe we need to resolve a few issues before I start to listen to you, which accounts for the beginning of, you dealt falsely with me before, you better swear an oath to me right away that you're not going to do it again. And this particular passage now goes on to show why this case of deja vu all over again is in our text. Remember last passage, we got to see the growing faith of Abraham, but more so the growing account of God's promises being unfurled within the people of Israel at this point in time. Initially here through Abraham, and of course later on through Isaac. And now we get to see the next installment of this through 2 examples. Firstly, the change in relationship between Abimelech and Abraham because of Abraham's growing maturity and faithfulness. And secondly, the slow unfurling of the promises of God in regards to Abraham acquiring land. Now, as you can tell in our text, Abraham is a bit of a nomad. He spends just as much time outside of the land promised to him as he does inside it, because as of yet he has no authority, no power to actually control the land. He spends most of his time as a wealthy nomadic herdsman, traveling around. And as he encounters various kings or warrior chieftains, he needs to have arrangements with them in terms of water and land and freedom of access. And that accounted for his fear, remember, previously. But Abraham has not merely acquired more blessing as he's been faithful, he's acquired maturity as a result of his growing relationship with God. And he displays that in his relationships now with Abimelech. And the second thing we get to see is God demonstrating that faithfulness of Abraham in regards to providing not just the blessings of material blessings in terms of greater herds and the like, but also the blessings of land. But it's just the interim stage yet. He still is a nomad walking around with his herds in order to maintain not merely his safety, but in order to maintain the herds. He has no land yet of himself really to actually access those blessings yet that were promised to him. But in light of that, we get to see Abraham's growing faith. So in other words, Abraham grows in faith whilst the blessings are still coming in terms of material possessions. He has received his sons, and that is a great blessing, of course, but he has not received all the land. In other words, you don't need to receive everything from the Lord that he's promised to you in order for you to display faithfulness. You can display faithfulness as you see the plan of God beginning to take fruition. And this is a great truth, not merely in Genesis 21, but also for us. We have not received the promises of the eternal God in utter fulfillment of those promises yet, but we have received enough of those partial fulfillments through Jesus Christ, guaranteed by the Spirit, in order for us to have absolute certainty that the promises of God, in order to bring us into his eternal home, will come to fruition. As we read about Abraham in this passage in Hebrews, Abraham was a man who did not receive the full promises of God, and it took him time to come to the desire to put his entire faithfulness to God into practice. And that can be true for us. But still, God worked with him and God helped him, and he learnt and he trusted. And it was credited to him as righteousness way back in Genesis 15. And he gets to, over time, display that growing trust in faithfulness in his God. And so do we. Failure doesn't remove us from the kingdom. Failure, yes, is sinful, and it does give us a chance to, I suppose, in our sense, learn, a bit like Abraham. But one day, that fulfillment of the promise of being with the eternal God will come to fruition. And like Abraham on the journey, we get touchstones. They give us opportunities to demonstrate the learning. Abraham could have responded once again in fear. It would have been harder because Abimelech has learned his lesson. But he could have resulted in fear. He could have resulted in anger about the wells. But he has learned, he has matured, he has displayed now, in this case, the righteousness of God with the king Abimelech, and so can we. We grow in our faith, and so can you. As we await the eternal promises of God coming to fruition, we don't wait passively, we wait actively. That is, we place the promises of God to live out the righteousness that he's given us through Jesus Christ into our daily lives. And like Abraham, we demonstrate that growing maturity, hopefully, to those around us. To Abimelech here, he gets to see firsthand that Abraham has grown. He gets to see firsthand that Abraham is not going to be a man who deals falsely out of fear. That even though the fearful situation could have arisen with the well situation, Abraham has learnt. And so the situation of the treaty shows Abraham's growing maturity, Abraham's growing importance within the region, but mostly it shows that God's promise to give Abraham the land is really starting to take hold.